But yeah, so we'll start off. Mark is going to talk to us on how to view root page variables and page variables in the console and what they tell you, how to use that to troubleshoot. Drew's going to talk to us about how to inspect API network calls, what the responses tell you. And then Dorian's going to walk us through how to find a list of path functions and how to use that information. And then back to Mark, he's going to talk to us about how to create breakpoints on actions, like so when you've got your flows running to see where something might be a problem, and then how to troubleshoot from there. And then we'll do that troubleshooting time. So Mark, you down to start us off with root page variables?
Yeah, let's jump in. And I realized when I was going through getting it set up this morning that to do the other than root page variables, we actually need to do the breakpointing. So what I'll do is talk about root page variables first, and then I'll wait till the end. We'll go through the breakpoint stuff where we stop on specific actions. And inside of there, I've got it set up to where we can see the local variables of wherever you're stopped at.
Okay, cool.
Let me let Steve in there. All right, so I set up this little page this morning. Very simple. All it is a grid of rows with 3 default records in it, 3 default rows in it. And then I have this one input where when you click this button, it's going to run an event on click. And it's just setting this variable into the root. So I'm using set variable action. My variable name is what I named the variable, but it can be anything you want. And then I'm getting the value for the variable from this input here. So if I click preview, let's just kind of look at that. When you look at it here, you're not going to see it doing anything, right? So I go testing 1 and I hit set root variable. Variables are hidden, right? So you can't tell that it did anything. So if I open up debug, I can do that with Command Option I on my keyboard. And sorry, my Brave browser is like throwing all kinds of MetaMask errors recently. So I'll clear those out. But you can also get to that. Oh, let me let a couple other people in here.
Don't worry, Mark, I've got it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll see them and I'll admit them.
Trying to remember actually in Brave where you go to, I think it's under settings here. More tools possibly.
You can also just right click inspect.
Good call. Yeah.
I always just right click somewhere on the canvas and then the last option is inspect, or third to last.
That's here. And that'll open this up. And when you do the inspect, it's like inspecting you on the element that you went on. This is also useful for just seeing whatever styling or properties you've set. I use this for when I'm checking my style settings, right? Like if something's a little bit off, I'm gonna actually just come in here and make changes directly in the CSS here and just kind of see how it affects it in the live view. So I do use that as well. So if we take a look at the console, I'm going to go over to the console. This is where you're going to be able to access any variables that are on the page. And I usually keep a little cheat sheet. I just copied them over here so that way I can easily chat them out. But these are the different console things that I put in. So I'm just going to copy this. And if I paste that here and hit enter, it's going to show me all the root variables that are on this page right now. So there's a couple things to note here by default. We're actually tracking the user's mouse position all the time. So if you ever need mouse position, you can just grab it. So if I come in here, I'll set that up again, and I'm just going to move my mouse around to somewhere else on the page and then hit enter. And you can see it's got a different mouse position in there. So as you're moving the mouse around, it's actually tracking that. So there are other things in here like IP address as well. In your page routes, you can specify track the IP address of the user, and it will actually put that IP address into a variable there that you can just grab if you want to. You turn it on and off per page route. So if I change this to say testing again and hit set root variable again, come back in here. And one thing I'm doing here, if I just hit up arrow is going to bring me the last thing in the console that I typed. So I don't have to go back and remember it. So like once you've done this 3 or 4 times, you can just kind of like up arrow through the things that you've done before, and you don't have to do it again. And so now my variable name is testing again. So sometimes when you're passing variables around, especially when you're passing them to the root and reusing those variables across different pages, you'll want to do this sometimes because you're like, well, maybe the variable is missing the value or something, like something's not working downstream after you've set that root variable. This is how you're going to find out if that root variable is actually set properly or not. So you'll like get through part of your actions, stop, check the variables, then see if it's correct. If it is, okay, then keep going. So there's a lot of that goes on. One other thing I'd probably want to note here, and then we can jump over to the API side of things. Whenever I'm debugging, in a really simple setup like this, it's just one action in a flow, right? But sometimes you've got maybe a really complex set of flows, maybe they're nested, and you can't really tell what's going wrong. You just know that something at the end of this chain is broken. It's not working correctly at the end. The output I'm expecting isn't there. One thing I'll do is I'll actually break up my complex actions and flows into a series of steps where I click a button to go from step 1 to step 2, then step 3, like 4 or 5 buttons in a row. And then that way I can actually like fill down in and figure out what's going on. Because sometimes you just can't tell. Like if you're in there building real fast and building a lot, you get this massive page built up and then you go, oh, where's it broken at? It's very hard to tell because you've got this chain of 50 actions running. So one thing I do a lot of is if I think it's probably in there, then rather than building out all of it, I'll stop it right in that one part and just check to make sure everything's good and then manually move it to the next step. So I think any questions on root variables or anything around variables in general?
Yeah, let's give it a minute on that,
Sure.
just in case anyone does have a question. So what are the things that you have in the notepad on the right, Mark?
Yeah. So when well, I guess that's actually a good thing to talk about is scope of variables. So a scope in programming is basically where in context or in relation to the other things is this variable. So the scope of the root variable is in the root page, meaning it's at the top level. So it's accessible by all other pages that are inside of that page. So in this case on the screen, remember we have the row, we have 3 instances of the row page, and then we have the root page, which is called home in this case. So all of these pages have access to those root variables. So when I'm wanting to access the root variables, I can use this syntax. If I want to access the current form variables, I can use this one. And you can also roll up into parents by using a dot parent, dot parent, dot parent. You can go as far as you want. So if in really large setups where you have maybe nested grids, so like for instance, the left panel in Bildr, this is a series of nested grids. So if that could go to infinity there, right? So you could, because it depends on how many divs you have inside of divs. And so if I breakpoint on one that's like really far down in there, I can actually just do dot parent, dot parent, dot parent, and just go up and see what the variables are all the way up and down that chain in the console. And then this part we'll get into whenever I actually do the breakpointing. This is all about the breakpointing part of it.
Okay, so those little things are just little pieces that you copy and paste into the console tab of debug.
Yeah, and when you type, honestly, you don't really need to copy and paste them. I never do, because as you start to type, if you just type BRW, you're gonna get these as the options. And then when you click into that, if you hit dot, it's actually gonna give you the next set as well. And the one that you're looking for is underscore vars. So underscore vars is where you find the variables.
Okay, so we'll come back to you after breakpoints.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Could you chat those could you chat those guys, and maybe would it be helpful to put in front of them what they're for? I think you gave like a little description, or I don't know,
I'll tell you what,
maybe for people who aren't.
I'll put it together while Drew and Dorian are going through theirs, and I'll get it all drafted out and then chat it in there.
That sounds awesome. All right. So Drew, talk to us about how to inspect API network calls, what the responses tell you, and then if anyone has resources, where do you, I know that some integrations might have different responses, or are they all the same? Could you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Cool.
Cool. So yeah, this is like a very common debugging situation is you're using an API in your app. You call the API and then maybe you like set the response into an element or something and it doesn't show up. And so you just need to figure out like what's going wrong, like what part is broken or whatever. And so what I'm about to do is just inspect the network request, which is actually universal. It's not Bildr specific, but I'll talk about like some Bildr specific stuff in the way Bildr does it too. But really, this is what you would do with any API request. So the first thing is I'm going to open this debugger, which is what Mark did. Same thing. I right clicked and hit inspect, which is how I do it. I don't even pay attention to where I'm clicking. I just right click, inspect. It starts me off on the element that I clicked on, but I go right here to this network tab if I'm looking for the network. And so if you already have the page loaded and you load a network tab, it's going to be blank because it hasn't been like recording network activity yet. But if you refresh, you'll see every call that this website does to a network gets recorded in here. And I can actually see all the things like this is the font. I can see that it calls to the font and it returns the font information. So you can get like a lot of good info from here. But this site, it's very simple. What it does is 2 API calls when you load the page. So if I look in these network requests, I can look for something called HTTP call. Oh, actually, it doesn't do them when I load the page. It doesn't when I type. Let me make the API call. So if I type a city in here and hit search, it's going to add network requests into here because I did network requests. And so you can see at the bottom, HTTP call, there's 2 of them. In this case, what this actually does is if I type Austin, it does 1 API call to find a specific location. So it returns like this specific address with a latitude and longitude. Then it does another API call for some weather data. So that's why there's 2. But I can see them right here called HTTP call. And that is Bildr specific, that part. So Bildr, if you use the API call action, in the background, it's going to run this HTTP call. If you use like one of the API actions we built, like Airtable or Xano or any of those, we're using our own HTTP call function in the background. So it'll look like this. And most of the time that's what you use because even if you're making a custom action, you can take advantage of Bildr's API call function. So almost all the time in Bildr, you'll see this HTTP call. That's my point. If you click on it, you're gonna click on it here on the left side in the list. And then the things to pay attention to are headers, and then preview and response, which in Bildr's case are the same. Normally response looks like this and preview is nicely formatted. But in Bildr's case, the preview is not nicely formatted. So maybe one day we'll be able to fix that. I'm not actually sure why it does that, but just a small note. If you did a direct API call, not through Bildr, this preview would probably be, broken down. You can expand and collapse the children and stuff. But anyway, the first thing I'll do if I make this API call is I'd go to response or preview. And you can see right here a few things. So it's kind of hard to read with these slashes, but you can see the words and you can see there's response 200 OK and the status code 200. That's the response code. So if you know APIs, if there were an error, it would have something like in the 400s or 500, and it would tell you then the error. So you would see like 401 or 404 here. And then if you read on, it would say something about the error. So you can actually find what's going wrong there. And so it might say, you sent them something in an incorrect format. It might say your API key is wrong, but you'll be like, oh, that was the problem. And then you go fix it. Or it might say, for example, like one of the inputs you sent it is formatted wrong. And so in that case, you can go to headers to actually see what you sent the API. So preview and response is what it returns, but headers is what you send it. So this top stuff is Bildr. Like this is sending to Bildr's server. And as a side note, the reason we do that is to do completely secure secrets. So if you have an API key and you don't want to expose it in the browser, anytime you run an API call in Bildr, it's going to actually send the instructions to Bildr's server and then make the API call from Bildr's server, which is a bit unique and the correct way to do it. So anyway, the request and header is actually Bildr's request, but if you scroll to the bottom, you can see the content that you're sending it, the headers that you're sending it, the method, and the URL right here. And so if there were a problem with, maybe you sent it I sent it a city and tried to get a location, but this city was blank, and the error would come back and say, you know, no city specified. I can look in here under content, or I can look in here. In this case, it's under URL right here, location, input Austin. And I might see question mark input equals, you know, something incorrect and say, oh, that's my problem. And then I can go fix it. So basically between the headers and the preview or response of this HTTP call, that's where you're going to diagnose pretty much anything in an API request. So I think that's it. It was kind of dense, but once you do it, it's actually self-explanatory. Like thinking back, I should have done one with an error, but when you see errors, it's usually just writes out what they are right there. And it is different every time. So of course, your original question, depending on the actual API you're using, they're going to give varying amounts of information. So some of them, they'll give you like really awesome specific information on exactly why there's an error, and then you can just go fix it. And then some of them just say general error, and they don't give you any information. And that's where you might have to dive in deeper into the headers and try to look a little bit, you know, deeper into your config and see if anything's messed up.
Okay, cool. So really it's up to the person or whatever product you're integrating with to send over the response and to define what each of those means.
Yeah, I mean, and there are standards. So those numbers I show, there's a 200, okay. Anything in the 200s is like a success response. Anything in the 400s is some form of an error. So there are some standards, but really they're not controlled standards in any way. They're like recommendations. So yeah, so every API will return a different thing, but all major APIs, like if you're using Airtable or Xano, like any major API, usually returns pretty good error responses and pretty informational things that are human readable. So most of the time it's fine. If you use an obscure API, or if you use like an API that someone built, you know, on the side for one project, maybe then you wouldn't get all the information you need, but.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So are there any, Mark?
Yeah, I would add to that too. Like I ran into this a couple of weeks ago. You know, the docs are half wrong sometimes. Some API docs are great, some are just wrong. Unfortunately, it's just like trial and error sometimes. You just have to go, like, it's giving you this response, but it doesn't, you know, actually make any sense. Like it'll say, you know, invalid token, and you double check and triple check, and it's like, it's right. I know it's right. I can see that it's right, you know? And sometimes it's actually something totally outside of that. So unfortunately, there are things in APIs that you're reliant on whoever you're sending the API call to have proper response information back. Like a lot of times it'll say something is wrong with the API key you're sending, but actually it's the header value. You didn't provide us the right headers for it, and things like that just don't match up. And it's just because it's a lot of work to do the proper documentation and responses on those APIs. And so if you run into those things, just chat into the Discord. That's probably going to be the fastest way to do that. Or if you want to go into, like, we can go help you by looking at the documentation that way. Or if it's something very specific, like if you have your app built and you don't necessarily want to show everybody, submit a support ticket and we can jump in there and help you out too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if anyone's having issues with their APIs, maybe we can troubleshoot some of those at the end of the call. So it looks like we've got a couple of questions in the chat, which you guys can see, bottom panel, little chat bubble. Let me see. Fraser had a question. Does Bildr send everything as is that it receives when it makes the API call on your behalf?
Yeah, it does. So Drew, if you could go to the headers again, and if you scroll to the bottom and look at the content, well, this one's a little different because there is no content, but the URL and the content will be what's being sent through, and it does just get passed one for one, right? So like if you look at a more complex API calls where you have a whole bunch of content in there, we're basically passing all of that directly across. And you'll actually be able to see it in there. Dorian, do you have anything that you would add to that?
No, I think that's, yeah, it's just every endpoint you're connecting to is just almost always so different that it's hard to
have
a generic approach at it, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And we intentionally do just pass it a straight pass through because of that, right? Because if we try to interpret it, there's no telling. We would probably get it wrong 99% of the time and right 1% of the time.
And the response
Mark,
to
what about the,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, what about the case where the builder sends you an error when you're trying to make an API call if you pass it something invalid? Like I've seen that before. If I put in like an invalid content type or something, I've seen an error back from the builder API saying, we can't send this to the resulting API because something's not formatted right. Am I understanding that right?
It should be pretty rare that
Yeah,
that would
well,
occur.
there is one thing here where like you have to send Builder a content type header, which really like standards wise, you're supposed to send in every API request, but it's usually not required. So it's not in people's docs. So if you don't know that, but it defaults into Builder. So it's like we try to help. So if you don't know that, you don't send this content type, it will get an error on Builder's end before like the situation you're describing. I think in that case, I'm not actually 100%. I think in that case, this status code here will be an error, because what this is, and this is like a little meta, but like if you are used to this stuff, it's not that crazy. Basically, this request here, this status code, is Builder's is like the call to Builder. So Builder returns a 200 no matter what. Even if Builder makes an API call and that API code gets an error, the actual HTTP call thing to Builder is going to be a 200 success response. So I think if you messed up the original call to Builder, even if it's something different than this, if you just messed it up somehow, I think this would give you an error up here. But then if you look at the actual response, this response is from the API. So even here, Builder might have a 200, but this might say 404 or 401. Because this is everything exactly. This is what I was about to say a second ago too, is like whatever the API response is going to be exactly in here. And so that's under content. And then whatever API, whatever the status code they return is going to be here. So Builder is basically taking the API response, slightly formatting it, but not changing any of the actual information, just, giving you those values back.
That makes sense. Yeah, so I remember now the scenario where it happened. I was helping someone with an API call, and they were using an external API, and the documentation didn't require a content type in the header. And if you use the Builder API action, it, like you said, it automatically drops the content type header in there. But if you think, oh, I don't need that, and you hit the X to clear it out, then you'll get the error. So I guess the moral of the story is you always want to leave that content type in there, even if you don't think you need it.
Yeah, at least for right now, because I think we can probably get rid of that requirement. I bet. I don't know, and I haven't even seen like the dev side of what that is, but my guess is we could fix that, so that's not required, and we could probably fix this preview. So at some point, I think that would happen, but I haven't actually talked to anyone about it or anything like that yet.
And yeah, the other way that you could break it is if you format improper JSON into the content. It's like, because you can just change the content in the action to be anything, right? So you could just change it to text and just manually write JSON in there if you chose to. And if you improperly format that, then it won't accept it. And you will, the core might actually stop that from even executing, from even going out. I think it probably would. It wouldn't even do the network call. So if you're clicking it and you've done something custom in there and you're not seeing the network call at all, that's probably why.
Yeah, that's another part of debugging. If you don't see this HTTP call, something happened before it even attempted the API request.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a couple points of failure that might happen there.
Yeah, the APIs are complex. That's why it's good to kind of be able to check into these calls and responses in here.
All right. Steve does have a question, and then I'm down. I know everybody's using API, so if there's any follow-up questions, feel free to chime in. But Steve is asking what the difference between a webhook and an API call is.
They're very similar, but in a webhook situation, it's like a webhook is purposely a URL. So, you could trigger a webhook with a link, basically. Like anytime you go to that URL, whether you make an API request to that URL, whether you load it in a browser, whatever, it's going to trigger a webhook. So it's almost like you could think of it as like a nicely nice UI packaged up version of an API. Because what it really is on the back end is like a GET request to an API endpoint. And so when the other end, when that API receives that request, it's going to trigger something or do something. That's pretty much what the webhook is. It's just a way that you don't have to know APIs. You can just go to a URL and it will trigger something on the API owner's end, whatever that is. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Hey,
Brilliant.
Steve. Thank you. Good question. All right. So let's head over to Dorian for Dorian to show us how to find a list of path functions and then how you actually use that information or why you would need to find those path functions.
All righty. Can you guys see that okay? Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm in the studio here. This is actually the data manipulation pattern. So you guys can grab this and import it into any project just by going up to patterns. The reason I'm in here is because I actually have an area in this pattern where I actually run like probably the most generic or the most used paths that I use whenever I'm manipulating data. So for example, I'm just gonna click on this element here, go to events. And if I go to this action, so how to get access to a path. So in this example, I'm using the element set value action. And if you look here, I'm not sure if that's too small or not, but there's a link here that says path. And there are actually 3 different input types in Bildr that give you access to this path link. And I can show you what those are. So the first one is from element value. Second one is from variable. And the last one, if we go all the way to the bottom under advanced, we've now made that available under system. So in any action argument, if you're using any of those 3 input types, which this one's using the from element value, you're gonna see that path link. And if I click on that path link, this right now is gonna give you an input where you basically need to know the names of the paths, the syntax of the arguments if the paths accept any. So you really have to know what you're doing to use these at the moment. But I want to show you something where you can actually get a list right now for all the different path options that we have available. So if I open the developer tools and we go to sources, on the left side under the Bildr domain, just expand the scripts folder. And if we go to the file called boppy.model, let's see if I can make this a little bigger. In this file, if we scroll down, the top part's not really related to that stuff, but if we scroll down a bit, we're gonna get to this area where it's a get token value. And
That line 141.
Yeah, line 141. And if we go further down, we're going to see the switch with all the different cases for the path functions that we have. So like get value, we got some date ones, to string. In this case, on that example, I'm just using the length. So if we scroll down, we'll actually see that here. And there's just a lot of different paths that you can use. And it's probably too much to go through each one and what every one of these does. But this is where you can dive in and get the list of all those, at least for right now. I'm already working on a new UI. That's not going to make it in this release that we're working on, hopefully the next one. But basically, that's going to give you the list of all the available paths that we have available, some definitions around them, and also some examples on use cases and how to actually enter those so you can use those successfully. But in this case, basically what this is doing is it's grabbing the value from this element here, which in this case, it's a table view element. And actually, it's not even the value, it's grabbing the data that's being set in that table view element. And the reason I'm doing the data is because it's going to grab the data before it even attempts to try to load those entities into the element. So in cases like if you're using the grid element, If you are trying to get the length, which in this case would give you the total count of objects or records in that array, if you're using the get value, then it might fire too fast because the get value is going to wait until every row is actually loaded. And if this executes before that's loaded, then it's most likely going to give you an incorrect count, because if you have like hundreds of thousands of records, it's going to take a bit to load all that information. But if you do use the data instead of the value in that case, it's just going to grab it as the data is being passed to that element. So it's not going to wait for the render to finish, and it'll always be accurate. So in this case, it's just doing path get length. And if we go to the preview here, this is the button that runs that action. The output that it's giving us is just 5. So it's telling us in this table, again, this is just being represented as a table, but internally it's really an array where each of these rows is an object and every column is a property in its value. So it's telling us, it's grabbing the length of the objects in this array, which the total count is 5. So that's what that one does. And there are a bunch of different paths that I use all the time. Like you could do a sort. On the sort one, if we look here, if we provide an actual argument inside of the sort, in this case, I'm passing the name. By running that, what that's going to do, it's going to take that array and then sort it by the column I gave it, in this case, the property name. And then it's going to give you that data back sorted by that column. So notice here it's sorted by name. And there's a bunch of different paths, like reverse. Basically, it's just going to reverse the order. So instead of going 1 through 5 here, it's going 5 through 1. There are a little more advanced things like this path here called join by key. What this is going to do is basically take this array and the argument I'm passing in that path. If we look here, it's kind of hard to see, but this is ID. And if I run that, it's going to take that array and only return the values comma separated for that key that I provided in that path. So in this case, it just grabbed all the values from the ID column and returned that value. The only key values, this one, I'm passing it the name argument. So if I run this one's going to return an array of all the values of the column I provided. So if you notice here, grabbed all of the names, and it's just an array with those outputs. Another one that I use is only keys. And this one's pretty cool because this one allows you to take like the original source. So in this case, I'm providing it this array here. But let's just say I'm trying to get rid of this ID column and only return a specific set of columns. So to do that, if I do only keys and give it the columns that I want, in this case, remember the columns are properties. So it's doing name and status. If I run that, the output gets rid of the columns I didn't specify. So just very simple ways on how to manipulate that data. And the cool thing about paths is that it does it all in that same action, and you're not having to chain like different set of actions to accomplish like some of these basic data manipulation things. There's a few other examples, but I'm not going to go over all these details. You guys can always go to this pattern, which is in the patterns list, just the data manipulation. And this has a bunch of different examples doing different things. So you guys can play around with it, test with it. It does get a little more advanced on some of these, like this replace here. This one is actually doing a regular expression inside of it. So that gets a little more complicated, where it's now searching for specific patterns to find the value and then replace that value with something else. And there are some use cases, like for example, on this replace one, if I go look at that one, go down. Just this one here. Just so you can see, a lot of these paths can get pretty complex. So the first thing this one's doing is actually taking that array and converting it to a string. with an argument of 1. The reason is because the replace path function needs the value to be in a string. After it does that, then it runs the replace function, which is all of this here. And inside of it, the first argument is actually this part here. So it gets complicated. But what this first part is actually doing, it's doing a regular expression to find a pattern in that string value, looking for the words basically pending. Then it's telling it to do a global search and also do a multi-line search. So if the value is multi-line, then the second argument, it's the value it's replacing it with, which in this case, it's weighting. But because the output, if you remember, the first thing I did was convert it to string. So if I were to just output that value after it did the conversion and put it back in that table element, it actually wouldn't work because it's no longer a proper array value. So what I would do after that is basically I use another path function called replace all, where I'm getting rid of all the escape characters, which were the slashes, replacing it with nothing so that it goes away completely. And then after that, I run another path function called JSON parse, which will basically take that value and parse it into its proper JSON format. And now that I have the value back in an array, I can now, it will now properly set it back against that element. And if I go to the example here, so basically what that one's doing is, like if I just ran this regular replace one without using the regex, the replace is only going to find the first instance of the word pending and replace it with waiting, which if we look here, we actually have 2 different records that both have pending approval in the status. So notice that first one only replaced that first record that it found, but not the second one. But by using a regular expression, it's now searching all the patterns that it matches and replacing it. So if I run the second one, it now correctly replaced all the ones that I was trying to find.
As you guys can tell, Dorian put a lot of work into this pattern. So Dee, we've actually had some good questions coming out of this, and I think people would love to see this more. Can you chat us 2 things? One is the preview link that you've got right there, because with the preview link, y'all can just go and actually learn about what each one of these paths does, and you can try it out. And then with the actual pattern link, if you look at it in the studio view, you can go into what's actually running and how those are set up to run when the button is clicked. So that way, if you can't see it that well here, you've got a couple of options. I feel like we could have a whole conversation on that, Dorian. There's so much there. I did not know. Yeah.
They're super powerful. Like
Cool.
most of Bildr uses paths. There's almost nothing I build that is not using some sort of path to handle, setting values and getting values out. So it's very powerful. So it's definitely something worth going and learning. So yeah.
Awesome. If you can chat those, and then if not, sorry, we're running short on time. So that we can have time to troubleshoot. So I know, Mark, you wanted to do the breakpoints. So if anyone is actually wanting to troubleshoot or ask a question, could you maybe just like type it in the chat so I know how much time we can spend, or I guess we can just go a little bit over today if needed. Okay,
for sure.
That way we have time to do the stuff. But any other questions?
It's true. It's true.
Did you see Chief's comment, Dorian?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, but they're super powerful.
I can't bring myself to get all the way into it. I'm just like, hey, Dorian, can you tell me what to type here? I just can't figure out the language. But one thing I would like to say on paths, paths are ridiculously powerful. You can chain them together. We're constantly adding new paths as well that are supported by the Bildr core. As we run into them, we add new paths to the core. In addition to that, I also usually ask the developer who writes the code for these paths, I usually ask them to also make me an action that does the same thing. Like almost always I'll ask him to do the same. So that way we have, and eventually I want it to be a parity where we have 1-for-1, because then instead of writing a path at all, you can do a chain of actions that like set the variable of the value, make the change, set the variable. And it just depends on how you think about it. Some people want to see it in a flow like that. Some people are just fine seeing it in a text string. And then what Dorian's building in the path UI is like the perfect middle ground. He's taking all of these path functions and effectively dynamically creating a UI for each one with all their arguments. And so as we add those path functions, it just creates it all. So that'll be a really big power move sort of for Bildr at that point, because this is obviously code, right? I mean, this is like you're writing code here. But with the UI around it, you're writing code without knowing you're writing code. So I'm excited for that path UI to come out.
Yeah.
It'll help me a ton because I don't I get lost in it. No regex UI, right? That would be insane.
Not yet, but I do want to eventually include, like I'll definitely have like some indicator on the paths that accept regex. So you at least know you can go in and put it in, but eventually that we should have it.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I do use replace. I use replace all a lot. I use slice a good bit.
Yeah.
Like if I'm, for instance, I did in one of my projects where I'm using MetaMask, I wanted to, after you connect your wallet, I want to show you the MetaMask wallet address that you've connected with, but I don't want the whole string. I don't want the whole like 25 characters or whatever. So I slice the first 6 and the last 4, concatenate to ... between, and it makes a nice little thing, you know?
All right, I chatted those links out. The preview link and the data manipulation pattern link.
Yeah.
So people can check out Dorian's awesomeness. Okay, did we miss any questions in there? It looks like, yeah, it looks like we've got that. We've got everything down. Yeah, feel free to chat questions if they come up. Dorian, that was awesome, man. Thank you so much. If anyone is ever curious about paths, I'm pretty sure you know who to chat with. All right, so next up we have Mark, who's going to talk to us about creating breakpoints on actions, and then have like, yeah, creating breakpoints on actions, how you can do that and why you would do that to help troubleshoot something.
Yeah, so I do this all the time. I'm sure everyone who builds complex projects with Bildr, you're eventually going to need to be able to stop in the middle of a flow, right? So the thing is you've got a flow with a series of actions, and something's not working right at the end, and you need to be able to put a breakpoint to stop in the middle of the flow in one of the actions and try to troubleshoot what's going on. So what I want to do first is show how the input arguments, right? I'll show an action, a flow and an action, and then we'll go look at stopping on that action. And then we'll look at how the input arguments translate to the line of code inside of the debugger, back to how those input arguments are set inside of the studio. So the one we'll start with is this, the one that we were looking at before, the set root variable flow. And we have this one action here. So this action has 3 input arguments. There's the target page, which I've said I want to go to the root. There's the variable name, which I just manually typed a text value of my variable name. And then there's the value, which I'm getting from this input element here. So this text input element. So those are my 3 arguments for this action. So what happens is when I click this button, that sends basically a message to the core with those arguments, with the action ID, and the core then executes that, interprets that JSON configuration that you set when you clicked all the options inside those 3 arguments. So that's what's happening when you click that button. Now, if I want to stop whenever that happens, if I open up the debug tools and go to sources, the same place that, that Dorian went to, what you're going to see here is your app, right? So this is my preview link, or if it's a custom domain, you're going to see your custom domain here. And then underneath that, you have scripts. And Dorian went to the Boppy model. I'm going to go to objects.js here. And what we're going to look for, you're going to scroll all the way down to line 2104, and I will chat this out as well. Line 2104, then this does change. Like when we publish, when we release the next version, it's not going to be 2104 anymore, but the syntax won't change. And it usually is somewhere around there. And maybe we can, we are having documentation written right now. And so maybe we can include all this in that documentation and we can keep it updated with where these breakpoints need to be. But what I'm going to do is just click right there, and that will actually put a breakpoint on this line where you see window, function, and in particular on the right, you can see these things here for which form is it on, which object did it come from, what are the input arguments. That's what these are for here. So now if with this clicked, you can see over here it says breakpoints, and I have that breakpoint on. When I click this button, it's going to stop. Okay, now I didn't put anything in there telling it to stop on a particular action or anything like that. So it's just going to stop on anything that runs in your page. All right, so if I were to refresh right now, so if I just hit refresh, it's going to stop on everything. So it's stopping as it renders, it's stopping as it runs any action. So every time it does anything, it's going to execute and stop on it. So if I know that I'm going to run this particular thing, I can type something here and hit test. It's going to stop for me there. But I can pinpoint a specific action if I choose to. Right? So rather than stopping on every action that's running in the page, we're going to pinpoint one particular action. So to do that, I'm going to go back into the studio. And right here, oh, I have to release the breakpoint because it won't run over here either. So if I click on the three dots of the action, you have these two IDs here, action ID and action type ID. What we want is the action ID. And I can just highlight. I'm going to do command copy, go back over here. And this I actually do keep pasted somewhere because it's very specific syntax. And I will chat all this in there. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm going to put an action ID inside of quotes. And what's nice about this, because it's an array in there, I can actually stop on like multiple ones. So I could put a list of action IDs inside of there, and it'll stop on all of those. So what I'm going to do is copy this. So remember we had clicked on, let me turn this back on. We had clicked on there to turn that on overall. If I right click on that breakpoint and choose edit breakpoint, I can paste what I had over there. So what I'm doing is basically limiting the breakpoint. Now I'm saying, don't stop on everything, only stop on this one action ID. Okay, so now with that in place, I can run other actions and it's not stopping. It's not stopping as I click those buttons. But if I click this, oh, I forgot about this. This happened to me actually when I was setting it up and then I totally forgot. I copied it out of a pages document, which I never do. I just did that for this, but it puts the wrong format of double quotes in there when I copied and pasted it in. So make sure you're doing it from like something that's not a formatted editor. So we'll get it out to you though, and we'll put it in a spot where you can just copy and paste it in.
How to troubleshoot your troubleshooting.
Yeah, exactly. It actually happened to me earlier when I was testing it. I totally forgot. So now when I click that, it'll stop only on that one rather than on all of them. Okay, so the key thing there is you're putting in a specific action ID and you're stopping on that specific action. So if I refresh again, it loads everything and it didn't stop on the breakpoint because it didn't run that specific action yet. It's only going to run that specific action when I hit the button. Ooh, testing. Click the button. Okay, so now that I'm stopped on it, what I want to do is check and see what the input arguments are for this action. So if you remember in the studio, these were my input arguments. And if we look in that breakpoint, if I just hover over the input args, we can see those arguments and what their values are prior to the action actually executing. So this is stopped right before it actually runs the JavaScript that's going to use these arguments. So in this way, I can see Like for instance, if I had something set incorrectly, so maybe let me just let that run. And let's say in here, I had accidentally, instead of selecting text input, I had selected checking variables instead. Okay, so now whenever I go run this, my input arguments, it says checking variables. And so I'm going, wait a minute. Why is it saying checking variables? I wrote testing in there, right? So that's how I'm triggering it. Oh, something's wrong. I must have selected the wrong element whenever I was running through there, which does happen quite a bit. If you're moving fast and you just click the one above it, you've got the wrong thing selected. Human error happens all the time. So while that's running, I can stop and just see what's happening. And you can imagine in like a chain of actions where like one thing is dependent on the next thing. This is going to be really, really helpful for you. One other thing I would note here is some actions have multiple functions inside of them. So this one is a set variable action. It has one function. It literally just sets a variable. But like the API action that Drew was going through before, that action does the API request, but then it also runs through a set of other functions. Like it might set a variable with the response, or it might set an element value with the response. And so what's nice about this is you can actually, when you break on that one action, it's going to first stop on the API request, and then it's going to stop on whatever it's doing next inside of that action, like setting the variable with the response or whatever it is. So you can go through it piece by piece here. So I know this is getting like really into the weeds in terms of like developer debugging tools, but if you know how to do this thing, you can pretty much figure out what's happening inside of your project at any time. I know like Fraser and I did some debugging over the last few days in one of his apps, and this is how I was doing it. I was basically stopping on every step and seeing what exactly is occurring inside of there. So yeah, there's a lot of depth in there, but and there's more to it too. You can actually stop on anything inside of here. This is one of the reasons why these files aren't minimized right now. It's because it's just like I can just go in here and do it. So yeah, I think that's it. Any questions or anything we want to go through there? Good, cool.
Yeah.
So there's one
Looks
other
like
thing
we
if we want to talk about the local variables. If we want to look at that, do we have time for that?
Yeah, and
I'm good
then
too.
we'll okay, cool. We'll stay an extra 15 to
Cool.
help anyone debug anything.
Yeah. So what I'm going
Or
to
ask
do,
questions. Yeah.
remember I was talking about scope in the variables before. So the way that the core works, you can always get access to the root variables because you're always in the root page. But like these, I have 3 instances of this same page, right? This row page. So if I were to try to find a variable that's inside the context of one of those pages, there's no way for the system to know exactly how that's like which one you're looking for, right? Are you looking for item 1, item 2, item 3 page to get the details out of? So there's a couple of ways you can go about this, but one way is you can stop on an action that's running inside of that page. And when you have that breakpoint running, you can actually access all the local variables that are inside of that page in particular, right? So instead of running on this action ID, what I'm going to do is run on the action ID that sets the local variable in the row. So same thing, I'm just going to go grab that ID instead, and then go back over here. I'm going to right click and edit and replace that with the other action ID. Okay, so now if I click this, it's not going to stop anymore. But now if I click on one of these buttons, it will stop. So if I click set local variable, it stops. But where it stopped is actually inside of that row. So, I mean, it's obviously not physically inside that row, but it's, in memory, I'm inside of that row. So what's cool about that is now you can think of it as like being in context to that. You're inside of that scope. And now you can access the things that are local to that. So if I look at the input arguments, I can see I'm setting item 2 into a variable called name. And what's cool, if I go here and type BRW form, and then remember we had done root before. This time instead of root, I'm just going to not type root, but do the same underscore vars, and I can see the variable value there. Okay, so now let's let that run by clicking this button here. And then I'm going to change this to say item 4 and click set local variable again. And I can see that it's going to set item 4. If I go back to console, hit up arrow. Okay, now note it's still item 2 because the action hasn't actually executed yet. So at this moment, the state of that variable is still item 2. The action is going to change it to whatever is in the input arguments, which in this case is item 4. So we'll let that run again. And if I do it one more time, we'll change it to 6, set local variable. We can see input arguments are changing it to item 6. Go back to the console one more time, and I can see that current state, it's item 4. Action that's about to execute is going to change it to item 6. And so by doing this, you can be inside of that particular row. You can also do something similar without having the action ID. If I just do like that, and I click here, it's going to stop inside of that one row. So you don't necessarily have to have an action ID. If all you're looking for is just the local variables in that moment, you can just hit the breakpoint, do the same thing, and you can see what it's at right then.
Me too, Peter. Peter's saying every time he learns something new about the inspector.
Yeah, and this is, it's really powerful if you learn how to use this for sure. So I think that's it. I mean, there's a ridiculous amount more, honestly, if we just kept going, but I think that's a good basis for it. And we can absolutely, you know, answer any other questions in the Discord, or if any of you have any questions at all, happy to run through it.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. That was great. Does anyone have anything that they want to debug or any questions they want to ask, like for your projects? Now's the time. No, I guess everybody's smooth sailing right now. No, it's probably information overload. Okay, well, Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit about maybe what your ideas or thoughts are on actually building a potential debugger in Bildr?
Yeah.
And maybe we can just kind of end on like, here's something to look forward to. You should learn this now, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, if you learn this now and how to use that debugger there, you can actually apply that to like any other tools that you're building with, right?
Yeah,
Or
you
any
can,
other things you're building?
yeah, the trick would be, you know, like where I was showing in objects.js, in this line, this is where you put the breakpoint. Every other tool that runs stuff like this is doing something similar. It's just the name of the file is going to be different. The lines are going to be different. The way it interacts, it's not going to be called IMP args. It's going to be something else. And the structure of that could be totally different. But if you know where to stop in there, you can absolutely do the same kind of breakpointing.
Okay,
And
cool.
if you can chat.
Yeah,
the
I'll get
second
it right
part.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's
Okay,
see.
cool, yeah.
So here are.
And you can't do code snippets here, so what do they need to watch out for when they're copying, pasting?
The quote.
You know what? I'll put, maybe we should do something just like drop it in the Discord too, as like a file.
I'm gonna do a couple of things. I think you can paste it here and just tell them about the formatting. And then what I'll do is in the Bildr post, we can share, I'm gonna share a list of all the resources from today, the pattern, what you chatted, and then we can do it in the Discord too. Does Discord let you do code snippets?
Yeah.
Or just a file would be fine, whatever you guys think.
Yeah, I think we can put it in that coders channel inside of Discord. Let me grab out of here.
Okay, that's good to know, John.
I'm going to go ahead and format it so that way it's not
Okay.
Terrible.
That works.
One
Awesome.
sec.
So overall, I hope y'all learned a little something new about how to debug your builds in Builder. And of course, if y'all have any questions, chat us. Thank you, Peter. Have a great weekend. And then Mark's going to chat this out, so we'll hang for a little bit and also hear what he has in mind for the roadmap for the debugger, the built-in debugger. And just another update on the release that we're working on. So I think pretty much got it close to where we're now going to start doing our 2-week, I call it a 2-week testing cycle, because this is really where we get all of the work that we've done into the test environment and start testing it and finding all the things that we broke and having to
We
fix
broke a lot of
them
things in this one.
and re-release and fix them and re-release. Yeah, there were some big changes we ended up having to make for static files and things like that. Good side effects are faster speed of loading your projects and faster speed of loading the studio. So it always ends up being good stuff, but if you build anything of big magnitudes, it is kind of, the testing is a little bit painful to see how many things you actually messed up while you were trying to do the new stuff. But it'll be great fun. So we'll work on testing that, and it includes actually a lot of fixes that y'all have found and chatted in Discord, which I am super stoked about, because that indicates that y'all are building things. You're actually building things that we are not building, and you're finding things. And so it's fantastic. I get really excited anytime someone reports a bug.
Frazier found a crazy edge case yesterday. I was like,
did he?
yeah. Dory and I went back and forth on how should we accommodate this. I mean, there was a good workaround. It was not too bad once we figured out what it was. But yeah, those edge cases are the thing. And so anytime you have a issue like that where you just can't figure out what's going on, chat in the Discord, DM us, create a support ticket, and we'll ask you if you DM us and it's something that needs a support ticket, we'll tell you. If it can be public, I would prefer it to be in the open Discord, just so that way everyone else can learn from it. So anything that can be public, please put it there in the public or in a community post.
Yeah, and we're not shy about y'all reporting bugs or stuff not working in Builder. Like,
it's important.
That's part of the process. Yeah. We'd rather be transparent than try to be like, oh no, go report this privately. We just want to know. We just want to know so we can.
We'll only ask for a support ticket, like where it's a private one, if you need it private. We actually would prefer it to be public, just because then everyone will learn from it, and also we do take pride in response time. So if we're not being responsive, it probably means because it slipped through the cracks. So message us, tell us, and we'll jump on it.
Yeah, and the notifications broke for emails back and forth in the community and the support tickets. So Discord might be the best way. But yeah, if we're missing something, just chat us, because then I can ping the team and be like, oh, hey, there's a response on this thing. We haven't seen it. And yeah, so sorry about that. And thanks for being patient with us while we work.
I guess I think like a week to realize what was going on. Like, how are we missing all these things that are going? They're not coming through, but emails aren't coming to us. We're not getting notified that there's a new thing.
So Mark, tell us what your thoughts are on the debugger, and then we can close it out and start the weekend.
Yeah, we've actually had an internal debugger for a while in Builder. One of our devs just needed it because the level of complexity that they have to stop on whenever we tell them, something's broken in the Builder project. It's so big that you just can't, some of this stuff you just can't get through it manually debugging. So he actually built a debugger in JavaScript that can interact with the JavaScript queue that's inside of that objects.js code. And it actually gives him, here's every action that's going to run and how it's all nested on across all the pages. And he can actually tell it preemptively, stop on that action without having to go grab action IDs and all that. And he built it in such a way that we can actually call it with actions. So that means it's really just up to me and Dorian and Drew to build a UI around that, which is no easy feat. It's a big one, especially because we need it to run in execution mode. So one of the things we'll have to do is because we don't really want to have that code in production unless you want it, right? Like you don't want it just like in your production app all the time. There's just no need to have that level of thing there unless you want it in. So we need to give you the ability to like in this deployment, turn it on, turn it off. So there's a lot of considerations there, but the core of it already works. So it's just a matter of building UI at this point, which it'll take some time, but we'll get it there. We need it. I mean, we want it badly. The team here wants it badly, so it'll come.
Mhm. Yeah, build it so y'all can use it.
Exactly.
As
That's
with
how most of
everything
this stuff
else.
gets built. Yeah, I was gonna say, that's it. Honestly, how
Okay.
most of it gets built.
Cool. If you guys have any suggestions or like stuff that you would like to see in that debugger, feel free to chat us. We've also got the feature request channel and Discord, and I'm keeping a list of all of those things that y'all submit. So, yep. Okay. So I think we are good to wrap. Thank you so much, everyone, for an awesome session today, and really appreciate y'all hanging out with us. Have a great weekend. I will post this in Discord and community and all the places. But as always, like chat us if you have any questions or need something, need help with something.
Thank y'all. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.